once the controller was mounted or modified, the controller for the LCD had to be modified to allow for a 5-volt input. Originally these are 12-volt DC backup cameras used for cars, so they use a standard 12 volts for that. The board had to be modded to run off of 5 volts. That was done. What I found was trying to mount it in this thing, the board was actually too wide. So it was pretty, I mean, obviously the next step I had to do there was to trim it down. So trimming the board as much as possible. I ended up lucking out, and there's a piece you can see right there. That's part of the screen LCD board. It barely sticks out. That is the longest part, and it made it by that much. So that was lucky. Some of the boards I've seen have wiring that goes all the way or extends towards the edges, and that wouldn't have worked. So that would have been a failure, and the project most likely wouldn't have happened. But it worked, so I lucked out, like I said. Sound is handled through the Raspberry Pi's audio output. It's wired to a mini 5-volt audio amplifier. Hooking up the speakers to the original Pi's output yielded something where you could barely hear it, so I had to get a mini amplifier from eBay. Channels a 5-volt in and then boost the signal, or boost the sound so that you could actually hear it. The original Game Boy speakers were used, so that's all mounted in there, and that allows it to have sound. So going through controls, that, and like I said, this is it's actually a female USB or micro USB adapter that I hot glued into there, so that way you could plug any 5-volt micro USB male pin in. I did, for sound, try to originally use the Game Boy potentiometer to adjust sound, but given the size and trying to mount it, it just didn't happen. Plus, eventually when I bent stuff, one of the little pins broke, and I just said forget it. You can control sound through Emulation Station's menu, which is great, so I just have to exit out and adjust the sound. Power switch, I didn't get a chance to use the original Game Boy power switch, so I went to Radio Shack and bought one of those micro switches. It does retain the switch, the actual Game Boy switch, so that was great. So then you just power it on and off with that. Did, because of the size of the Raspberry Pi, have to Dremel out most of the back end here, including the cartridge case. So of course that where the Pi sits, I had to cut the clip for the battery case there. So right now I've got masking tape, which I don't know if you could see. It's the clear, just masking tape to hold that in. Works great, kind of invisible, so that works fine. Of course I had to, since I had to Dremel most of that out for the screen, I had to cut the riser poles for each of the screws there. So there's actually no screws in any of those holes, but I did try to retain the 2 screws that are in the battery compartment, and that seemed to work well, because those are the only 2 things other than, well, those are the only 2 things holding it together, but the case stays together fairly well. So, but that's it. That's basically an overview. You can check out my blog listed in the information section for a detailed breakdown of the build. Hope you like that, and I'm curious to see if any of you are going to attempt to do this. It's a good, fun project. It was difficult and frustrating towards the end, especially with those GPIO soldered pins, but it's well worth it. And now I have something I've always wanted, sort of mock Game Boy Light. So thanks for watching. Leave me some comments or questions, and I'll try to get to them. Thanks, everyone.